Hi, good afternoon. My name is Amber Pacheco, and I am doing a presentation on a article that we were told to choose from our professor, Professor Valdés for statistics class, and briefly explain about it. So the article that I chose was The Influence of Exposure to Natural Disasters on Depression and PTSD Symptoms Among Firefighters. So the reason why I decided to choose this article was because my husband is a firefighter, and I previously, before changing careers, I was a police officer for about 2.5 years. I worked for the North Miami Beach Police Department, and I did experience a lot. And like I was saying, the reason why I chose this article is because first responders in general have to respond to mass casualties, natural disasters, for example, like Hurricane Irma, that is considered a natural disaster. Obviously, the aftermath of the hurricane can lead to mass casualties, power outages, people losing their homes, stores being closed. So, as a first responder or firefighter, they are there to pick up, like for the mass casualties. Officers, they just respond and it's more of like they're more of like security and securing the scene. The firefighters are actually the ones who go, and if it was a mass casualty after the natural disaster, they go and they pick up the bodies and they clean up after all those disasters. Police officers don't really do as much. So obviously, being married to a firefighter, he does come home, thankfully. And he does explain to me what obviously is going on, and I can really empathize with him and understand what he's going through because of the things that I was exposed to as a police officer when I was working. So it really puts a strain on the person as a firefighter, as well as a police officer or any other first responder, nurses, everything else, etc. But specifically for firefighters, just because they're so exposed to more natural disasters and more mass casualties than a lot of other first responders, they are more susceptible to gain PTSD, depression, or an addiction problem, or just in general. And I feel like I wanted to pick this specific article just to, I guess, inform the people that it's not as easy as it just seems like, hey, I'm going to go fight a fire and I'm just going to help after a hurricane. And it's definitely not like that. It's completely different. And it has taken a huge toll on my husband. He does come home and he has suffered from depression and PTSD based off of all the calls that he has responded to. So I do feel like people aren't really aware enough about what's going on, and that it's a real issue. It's not just people that are in the military. It can easily be someone as well as in the nursing field. You're watching people die, and just like as a natural disaster, you're having those people that were hurt in those natural disasters to come into the hospital to get care because they were hurt. So I feel like it's just, in general, just healthcare workers, any type of first responder, they just really need to be aware of these symptoms and what can really happen. So that's the reason why I chose this. And this article did help me realize a lot more about PTSD and how it affects people. So just to start off with the problem statement, the research was conducted on the interest and the effects on firefighter recruits and their depression, and they wanted to test out basically what they wanted to do. They wanted to follow these recruits, and they wanted to compare the differences between them being exposed to natural disasters or traumatic events during their academy, see if they develop any symptoms then, versus a firefighter that has been on for about three or more years and actually experienced a natural disaster. So the gaps in the literature was that the researchers in this article only conducted research for male firefighters. They didn't use any female firefighters, and they only used 7 different cities. I felt like the research could have been more in depth as far as using bigger cities, for example, like Miami. I did see that they did not use Miami. Miami is a huge city where there's a lot of mass casualties, not just because of natural disasters, and we are in basically a tropical area. I felt like that was a very big gap. So the purpose statement. The purpose statement is to see the relevance in PTSD and depression disorders in firefighters who have been exposed to natural disasters versus firefighters who have not been exposed in real life. That they were just simulations. Okay, so the tentative research approach is the researchers of the article used in inductive research approach. The type of study that was conducted was a retrospective study because the people that they were interviewing or they were observing, they had already experienced those traumatic accidents or mass casualties or natural disasters. So the procedure, as part of a large National Institute of Health funded study, firefighter cadets from 7 fire departments across the United States, they were followed through for their first 3 years of their fire service. The clinical assessments were conducted by a clinical psychologist at 4 points. Before graduating from the fire academy, which is when they were experiencing simulations, which was their baseline, at the end of their first 3 years of their fire service, and then they would do an annual 1, annual 2, annual 3. So that was their procedure. Also, phone assessments were also conducted by trained research assistants, so they would give them a call, and during their experience, as they gradually started getting a little more experience each and every year, they would call and see how they're doing. So the method of research, from what I read, it was quantitative and qualitative. The MRU librarian that did help me was Katia Nunez. She's the one that actually sent me this article, which was very informative. And my peacock question. What I thought is do re-employed candidates experience the same traumas in the fire academy than already employed firefighters who have already experienced natural disasters? So for the information, firefighters are often called to natural disaster scenes. The firefighters experience many natural disasters that also involve human casualties and massive destruction. Being exposed to these disasters take a huge toll and can lead to PTSD and depression. Natural disasters are also known to lead to PTSD and depression. This line of work places a very high demand on their firefighters and especially puts them at risk for developing some type of mental depressional disorder. The hypothesis is there is no relationship between firefighters responding to natural disasters and firefighters developing PTSD. The alternative is there's a definite relationship. So to test the theory and the hypothesis, the research did show that firefighters who have been exposed to natural disasters during their time of service showed more spike in them developing some sort of depressional or PTSD type of symptom than pre-employed firefighters. So the results of the study was, over the course of the study, it showed that the firefighters who have already been employed with the fire department and have responded to natural disasters, human casualties, and massive destruction have started to develop symptoms of PTSD and depression. The firefighter recruits that were not pre-exposed did not really show a spike, but they did show some type of form of PTSD based off the simulations that they were given in their fire academy. So the population for this study was, they did a population of 322 male firefighters, and they ended up having only 35 that they got their sample from. The variables for this was the disaster exposure was a between subjects independent variable, where time was a within subjects independent variable. And depression symptoms and PTSD symptoms were assessed as the dependent variable. So for So bias in research. I don't think there really was a bias. When I was reading through the article, it didn't show that there was a bias because the people that did conduct it, they were not firefighters. They were actually doctors. So the level of measurement was gender, ethnicity, marital status, and medical diagnosis. So for the data analysis, the firefighters were interviewed periodically during their time in the fire service. Data collected found that firefighters that were exposed to natural disasters and mass casualties were at higher risk of developing a PTSD symptom or a depressional symptom. So their findings were that the researcher found the results that the results indicate that natural disasters do have effect on firefighter recruits and firefighters' mental well-being, which could potentially impact the caliber at which they perform their job in the future. Exposure to further traumatic events could, in turn, increase the risk of developing further mental health problems. Efforts should be made to provide disaster-exposed populations, including firefighters, with comprehensive medical care and addressing any mental changes post-disaster, which I completely agree with. When my husband does deal with any type of natural disaster, even on my end as well, when we went through the whole Irma thing, and actually I was responding to the calls for Hurricane Irma, even with a mass casualty for a human, they don't really talk to you about anything after that happens. So it's just these symptoms end up being developed, and they get pretty much shoved under the rug, which can really lead to having a mental illness, which can lead to depression, which can lead to an addiction or anything like that, and can even lead to suicide, which I have personally seen. My husband and I both have lost people when I was in the police service. I personally lost 3 of my coworkers, and he as well in the past year, he actually lost about 3 of his coworkers as well to suicide. So that is my presentation, and I hope you like it. Thank you very much.